Hi, in this section we are going to talk about routing. We are going to start explaining how routing works in React to create a new route in our application called favorites. Inside this route, we are going to enable the user to create his own favorite list of the recipes that we previously loaded. Then we are going to move forward into handling 404 requests and redirects, creating a navbar to navigate through the different pages inside our application, to then jump on talking about how to share a state between two different routes. At the end, we're going to talk about how to get data from the page URL to start creating more dynamic routes. So let's start talking about React Router and how to create a basic routing system. First, we're going to understand how routing works. Then, we're going to start React Router DOM, which is the tool that we're going to use to create the routing, and create, as I said, a new favorites route. So React Router is a JavaScript tool that enables us to create a declarative routing inside our React application. And when I say React application, I mean both web applications and native applications. Just a slight but important comment about React Router is that the version 3 is very different from the version 4, which is the newest one and the one we are going to use. So if you found yourself Googling for information or documentation, you should please take this into account. The main component that we are going to use in React Router is called Browser Router. This component uses the HTML history API to keep the UI in sync with the URL. That means that when the URL changes, React notices it and re-renders his content, and also enables us to change the URL from inside the React code. Inside the Browser Router, we are going to create what is called routes. The route renders some UI when a location matches the route's path. So you can think the route as an if statement. If the URL matches the path that the route has, it's going to render the component that you're passing it. If it doesn't, it's going to hide it. So let's take this as an example. When the page is in the index route, in this case, I'm going to render the home component. However, the index path matches each URL that you can pass. For example, when you go to your /favorite path. So for example, when you want to go to your /favorite page. That's why React Router enables us to send a new prop to our route, which is called exact. When you send the exact to a route, the component is going to be rendered if and only if the path matches exactly the URL in which you're located. So we can solve, in this case, the issue of just rendering the favorites component when you are in the favorites URL. Just notice that these are all React components. So we can compose this with the components that we already have to create, for example, some shared layout between routes. That's very handy, for example, for rendering a header in each route without having to define it inside them over and over. So let's see this in practice. The first thing we're going to do is to install the React Router DOM package. Once this is finished, initialize your server. So this is where we left our application. The only difference is that now we want to have a new path called favorites. Just notice that it doesn't exist for the moment. So let's create it. The first thing we're going to do is to rename the app component and call it home. Because now I just want to render this with the path is in the index URL. Because our app component was the starter point of our application, create a new app.js file in which we are going to handle the routing of the application. So import React and create a new app component. Remember how we said that the browser router is the main component that we are going to use to create the routing. So just import it from React Router. Now that we have our browser route, we can start creating routes inside of it. So the first one we are going to create is the home. So we can have the application in the same point that we had before. This component is going to match the index path of the page and it's going to render the home component that I should now import. I want to export default the app. Okay. Remember, you should also import route from the React Router package. So save your file and go to your browser. You should see everything working just fine. Okay? So now it's time to create a new favorites path. Instead, and for this URL, instead of rendering the home component, I'm going to render a new favorites component that I'm going to create just now. Remember, but before creating it, favorites component, I just want to talk about two different things. The first one is that browser router only accepts one child. So to make it work, we must create a wrapper between both routes. And the other one is that, as we discussed before, the index path is going to render both the home component and the favorite component. So just let's exact prop to the first route. Cool. So now create a new file called favorites.js. And this is going to be just a very basic component. Inside this component, for the moment, only render a new heading called favorites and export it. Just notice how there. Okay, save your file and reload your page. Now, if you navigate to /favorite, we should see the component that we just created. But that's not actually right. It's because the Express server is trying to resolve this URL on the backend side. And of course, we don't have any route matching this on the backend side. We need a way of making React the one that processes the URL. Fortunately, there is a very easy way of configuring that. Go to your webpack.json file and add a new dev server attribute. Inside this object, we can set up a new configuration for the Webpack dev server called history API fallback, in which if we set it to true, the server, if set it to true, whenever the server receives a not found request, it's going to be redirecting that request to the index.html file. By doing that, React will take the /favorite and render the correct component based on that URL. Before testing it on your browser, you should restart your server. And when you do, just notice how Webpack dev server is telling us that all 404 requests will be fallback to the index.html file, as I just said. So now you can go to your browser and go to your /favorite, and it's working. But something looks weird, and that is that we don't have our header inside above our favorite page, and actually we want it. So the first option would be just adding the header inside our favorites component. But actually, we have a way of reusing some layout between routes, and that is by adding some other components inside the browser router. In this case, I want to add the header. Just import it in this file, and I'm going to remove it from the home component. Inside favorite, instead of rendering an H2, let's render just an H1. So save your files, and now when you refresh your page, you will see how the header is always being rendered no matter the route in which you are. So now you have a routing system set up in your project and a new favorite route to start working with. Congratulations!